to week 12 and chapter 12. We're going to talk about organizational communication this week. So you may be viewing this before or after our event on Monday. We're going to have a special live guest, Troy Case of the Career and Internship Center. And the plan is to do that through Meet. So if you're still looking forward to that, you can get 10 participation points for being there. So exam was scheduled for Friday to Saturday morning. If you missed that and you haven't been in touch with me, you need to do that. You can see I got my Albion College duds on. You need to be in touch with me as soon as possible to make that up. We're running out of time, and there's after this one, there's just one more, but there's a paper, there's quizzes, there's discussions, participation, etc. So don't let that slide. We need to take care of that as soon as possible. As I just mentioned, keep up. All in all, most people are keeping up pretty well. We're getting to a point, though, where a lot of people have some holes in the grade book, and those need to be filled. And I've got more than 90 students, and so I'm spending a lot of my time trying to chase down people, and I'd really appreciate it if you're able to do that. Don't count on me to come after you if you're missing something. Go to the grade book, look at the syllabus. I put up reminders every week, and make sure that you are not missing items, okay? So let's get right to it with organizational communication. This is chapter 12 in the text. As always, hopefully you are reading these chapters for every unit. There's a lot of great information in there, and we only touch on parts of the chapter, so there's a lot of good stuff there. We're moving up the scale in terms of size, moving up from small groups or into organizations now. Your college, you're not here. I'm in town. I think some of you are local too, but none of us are at the college. We're kind of a virtual organization right now, but it absolutely is an organization. And there's organizations within Albion, your athletic teams, your fraternities and sororities, the clubs, and what have you, just a lot of different organizations within Albion itself. But we'll be mostly looking at the professional setting. And I say communication audit activity, time permitting, we're not going to have time for that. So I apologize, we're not going to do that this term. Much of what you've learned in previous chapters applies to communication in organizations. For instance, successful communication on the job requires listening skills, care in making attributions and checking perceptions, verbal and nonverbal competence, awareness of and adaptation to differences among people, and the abilities to build supportive climates and manage conflict. So we're just going to be talking about structure. We're really not going to get into communication networks and links to external environments. We'll talk about structure in a moment here. But this slide is very true. You came into Albion and you were exposed to a lot of different people, and the same is going to be true when you go into the professional world. And so maybe probably even more diverse there. So it's going to really require you to be at your best communication-wise. In terms of structure, we can talk about several areas here. We all fit into certain roles in the organization. Your job description is going to describe exactly what your role is within that organization. And by the way, I think hopefully this will be the case because it's up to him, but I'm pretty sure that Troy's going to do um, something along the lines of interviewing for his session on Monday. Another thing that gives structure to communication in the organization are procedures. Okay, so procedures are something that are written, and they're often in something like an employee manual. Okay, and so that's going to further define your role and the communication that takes place within that particular role with other people as well. And then let's skip down there to hierarchy and power. Um, Power plays a big role in any kind of communication relationship, even if it's just interpersonal, of course. And it's absolutely true in the organization where roles and positions and job descriptions define different levels, hierarchical levels within organizations. Now, some organizations are more hierarchical than others, um, but very few are flat. There's definitely a vertical dimension to these, and power plays a big part in communication. This is something that is pretty fascinating, but again, we're just really not going to get into it. Networks, this is pretty advanced stuff too, and we'll probably touch on this. Obviously, network has a technological piece to it. We'll probably get more into this in the class that I'm going to be teaching, the online class this summer, small group and organizational communication. Now, I put in here on this slide, what is Albion's organizational culture? I'm not sure if I actually have put that in there yet, but that is the plan, I suppose. So if you're seeing something different, I changed my mind. However, here's a word that you've heard a lot before, and you're going to hear it again, culture. There are cultures to organizations. Cultures consist of values, behaviors, practices, and forms of communication that are shared by members of an organization and that reflect an organization's identity. So just think of different organizations and different employers, right? The cultures vary widely from one to the next, right? Say a non-profit organization with, say, a high-tech firm or finance or something on Wall Street, etc. So organizations all have cultures, and they are of many different kinds. Just as ethnic cultures consist of meanings shared by members of the ethnic groups, organizational cultures consist of meanings shared by members of organizations. Just as new members of ethnic cultures are socialized into a particular culture's pre-existing meanings and traditions, new members of organizations are socialized into a particular organization's pre-existing meanings and traditions. What do you think sustains and expresses culture? Communication, of course. And there's 4 particular types of communication that the text points out that are particularly important in developing and conveying organizational culture. They're what are called vocabularies, stories, rites and rituals, and structures. Vocabularies, just the language of the place. And again, it depends on the context in the industries. Language is going to absolutely differ from one industry to the next. Stories. There's personal stories, but there's also corporate stories, and that might be something that you'd find in the company's website. Okay, they might have the story of how the company was founded and everything. And these really shape the culture of any organization. And in this next slide, we'll take a look at rites and rituals. Rites are verbal and nonverbal practices that express and reproduce organizational cultures. Let's bounce down here. Rites of passage are used to mark moving into different levels or parts of organizations. For example, a nonverbal symbol of promotion may be the moving of an employee's office from the second to the fourth floor. So as you move up in your job, it can be symbolized by moving up in the organization and in the physical building as well. Now that is, this slide is covered here, but another rite, something that you will all know about and be familiar with, and I'm afraid very sad that a lot of you are going to miss graduation. Graduation is a rite. It's a rite of passage. And parties, holiday parties, annual company picnics, etc., those are rites as well. But graduation's a big one. That means you're moving on to the next thing. A little graphic for you. Rituals. Rituals are forms of communication that occur regularly and that members of an organization perceive as familiar and routine parts of organizational life. Rituals differ from rites in that rituals don't necessarily bring together a number of aspects of organizational ideology into a single event. You might not think of it right away, but bullying is a ritual in organizations. Okay, so it's not a rituals are not necessarily not formalized by the organization. They're just patterns of behavior. And unfortunately, that's a ritual in a lot of organizations. Structures in organizations, roles, they're your responsibilities and behaviors that are expected because of your specific position in an organization. Most organizations formally define roles in job descriptions. Rules, there's formal and informal rules. They could be in your contract or they could just be simple norms. Remember, norms are not necessarily stated anywhere. Regulative rules are, and you'll find those in manuals and such. And then there are formal policies, which are formal statements of practice, such as the employee handbook. Some of you, probably most of you, have seen this before. This is an org chart. Again, not all organizations are quite so hierarchical with a CEO at the top and then the workers at the bottom. And just ponder, how do you think structure like this, whether it's vertical and hierarchical or not, how does that affect communication? Can a worker speak directly to the CEO, or would that kind of be a no-no? Something to think about. Guidelines. Expect to move in and out of teams and organizations regularly throughout your career. If you're hired, get fired, hopefully not. Resign, that happens a lot. The interview is only the beginning. One other thing to keep in mind is keep a balance to your work and life. It's go, go, go these days, so that's something you got to constantly think about. And manage your personal relationships on the job, meaning make friends, but perhaps keep the romantic stuff outside of work. That's what the author will discuss a little more in the text. And just the last piece, tying this together with last week, small groups often make decisions for organization. And another activity that we're not going to be able to really get to was that you're going to be on a hiring committee to hire a new employee. So in any case, there you have it, organizational communication, and I will look forward to seeing you next week.